I think we can go ahead and get started. So, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today and for today's webinar. Our topic today is Global Parking Enforcement Technologies, and we're really very excited to get started. But before we get started, just a couple of notes. The webinar, of course, is being recorded, and after this webinar, in the next couple of days, you will be getting an email with a link to the recording on YouTube so you can view that at a later time. And then also for any questions that you might have throughout the program, please use the Q&A box, put your questions there, and then later in the program, we will address those questions. So that's it for a few reminders. And now I'm very happy to introduce our presenters. So our presenters today are the co-chairs of IPMI's Technology Committee, Carmen Donnell, Managing Director, North America for Pay by Phone, and Nick Mazenga, Parking Technology Consultant with Kinley Horn and Associates. So thank you again so much for being a part of our program. And Nick and Carmen, I'm handing it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction. Really appreciate it. Carmen and I, we're really humbled to be kind of talking to you today on behalf of IPMI and our fellow technology committee members. The technology committee, just for awareness, it's a collaborative group of peer elected volunteers. So we serve as that source of expert information to IPMI membership regarding the development of new technology and how it may be employed in kind of various aspects of the parking and transportation and mobility industry. Just for some background, like some of the past annual presentations, we've covered topics on frictionless parking, curb management, electric vehicle charging, and connected autonomous vehicles as well. So today, what we're going to do is kind of take a professional survey of modern parking enforcement models. We're going to start in North America and kind of see like where that stands right now. We're going to look abroad at other cities and what other countries are doing around the world and kind of finally bring some of those lessons back home. I'll be honest with you, this isn't like a technology showcase for its own sake. The goal that we're really trying to accomplish here is we want to leave you today with a much clearer picture of what's actually transferable to the North American market for your own context and what isn't transferable as well. So let's get started with that. We want to ground ourselves kind of where North America currently is from like a parking enforcement standpoint. So the industry, it's been on a very clear trajectory, kind of away from measuring success by ticket volume. And we're really moving towards measuring it by compliance. So paid transactions, fewer disputes, better curb outcomes. Those are the kind of the three forces that are really driving us to kind of shift for much more visible on this slide. Um, Digitization of payments is one, and permits. The rise of LPR is another big one, and the growing recognition that compliance first is a way better goal than citation first. But honest truth with this one, the bottleneck is not the technology. I think that's what we found in our research through this topic. The tools, we really have them. The real constraints that we found in our research was staffing and public trust. Those were kind of two critical ones that we were really dealing with. So kind of keep that in mind as we're looking through the rest of the world and we kind of see some of these examples. Little history lesson here, kind of like how we got here. We kind of look at it in different eras. So to understand where we're going, it really is helpful to kind of understand kind of how we got to this point. So parking enforcement, it's moved through around five practical eras. So first one being the manual era. I think this is probably what a lot of folks might be familiar with from a while back is, characterized by foot patrols, paper tickets, chalk on tires. That moved into the digitization era. So handhelds, much more centralized back office systems that made operations way faster, much more consistent. Then we went into this plate-based era. So permits and payments were really tied to the license plate, which kind of unlocked a lot more or a new layer of data and automation. And then we took those plates and we kind of took that into the automated era of LPR. So this was more camera-driven coverage. Data enforcement was done at scale. And now we're in this new era, this final era of compliance first era. So again, our goal is behavior change. It's fewer disputes. We don't want more disputes. We want most agencies, what I would say, they're operating at kind of like a mixture of all of these eras simultaneously. You may have like LPR in one zone. You might still be doing chalk in another. That's normal and that's okay. So we don't want you to take away and think, oh my gosh, we need to be somewhere here. Realistically, every operation may be in different levels. So when we talk about parking enforcement technology, we often focus on kind of like a single tool, like a camera or an app or handheld device. But a modern enforcement operation, it's really an end-to-end stack that we're really thinking of. So it starts with, payments and permits. That makes it easy for people to comply in the first place. So the easier it is to pay, the less likely you're going to have some issues with from an enforcement standpoint. Then moving into the enforcement, so the tools that the officers use in the field. But then on the back end of that, there's the adjudication process. So how are disputes and appeals handled? And finally, the evidence and audit. So photos, records, reporting, kind of make the whole system defensible. And the reason this matters is that you can't evaluate a single technology in isolation. So think about it this way, a really great LPR system paired with a really broken adjudication process, you might have a really great LPR, but if your adjudication process is broken, you're still going to have not great outcomes. So you really have to look at the whole stack together. And from a technology standpoint, that's kind of where we looked at this. Something that I think we need to really kind of lay out there is the public versus private enforcement. I think this is sometimes glossed over. Um, this slide, what we want to address is something that often gets, like I said, glossed over from the standpoint of public enforcement and private enforcement are different. They use the same tools, but they operate under fundamentally different authorities. So municipal enforcement, very easy. It's grounded in ordinances and regulations. It carries like a statutory citation authority. It requires a lot more due process. There's an appeals process. There's an adjudication process. Whereas the flip side of that, the private enforcement, on the other hand, it is purely based on a contractual terms and property rights. So there's no statutory citations. The posted terms on the lot is all that governs. And that difference kind of has real consequences because private operators, they face much higher, what I would say, reputational risk because their signage and dispute handling are kind of like that mission critical thing. If a driver feels like they're treated unfairly, there's not really like a government process to kind of fall back on in that instance. It's a direct relationship between the operator and then that customer. So again, I think a lot of you on the call, you might be on different sides of this, whether you're public or private side from an enforcement standpoint. So really understanding where you are in that kind of shapes the technology and the policy decisions you kind of can work with. So again, before we kind of look globally, we want to spend a little bit of time talking about the legal landscape that shapes like what's possible in the US. And we looked at it when we did our research, we started looking at different guardrails and kind of like what was keeping us in this lane of parking enforcement. So first, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, so the DPPA. This is the one thing that really limits how DMV personal data can be used, what permissible uses are defined, and how they apply to both government agencies and their agents out there employing this. The second is state LPR laws. If you've looked at them, every state's kind of does something a little differently, and that significant variance is a challenge. They govern who can operate LPR, how long your data can be retained for, what audit controls are required, and whether private entities are covered in that. So the third and final is the constitutional limits. So if you recall, there was a case, Taylor versus the city of Saginaw, and this is kind of was like a landmark ruling, which accelerated that shift from the physical chalking to like virtual chalk, the LPR. So this was a big shift for us from an enforcement legalistic standpoint. So the key takeaway that I think is really important from this slide is the aside that we have in blue at the bottom. Governance and data handling often matter way more than like the camera spec or the technology. And I think we're gonna you might hear that a little bit as the technology is there. It's really like the culture and the philosophy of enforcement that's hardest to challenge. And speaking of culture and philosophy, enforcement looks different globally. Um, First critical framing point here is, um, everywhere in the world, there's different places that have different enforcement methodologies. But the technology largely sometimes it has some parallels. So cultural and policy is really what shapes what's possible. culture shapes the compliance. How tolerant is the public of enforcement visibility? What are some of social norms around following rules? When we started looking at different countries to kind of explore like where we could get some insight from, there were certain countries that we had to rule out at the get-go because culturally, enforcement or that rule following of parking just wasn't there. So we didn't really feel like we could find as much from there. You really have to understand like the relationship is between the citizens and the government authority to kind of help us find some of those examples. Um, and like I said, policy really shapes the toolkit of what is allowable, what tools are legally permitted as well. So can you boot? Can you tow? Can you even use cameras in certain instances? And these vary enormously. But the same goal we found existed everywhere. Compliance at the curb and access. That was the thing that everyone was trying to drive to. But the path of kind of getting there is different everywhere we went around the world. So does this model, like when we look through each of these models, you have to say to yourself, culturally, does this apply to you? And we went through and ranked each one. So you'll see in Carmen's section where we talked about culturally, how does this transfer to others? So looking at this Venn diagram, I think this kind of will bring home that point I'm trying to make is on the global side, enforcement is about being seen and acting fast. So we looked at all the patterns and themes from the global ones we found. When I say this, something happens right away. You're out there, you're parked illegally, you might get a boot, you might get a tow, you might get a fine on the spot. It's very immediate. The focus is on kind of clearing that space, not racking up tickets. And what people accept depends on the local culture. So now flip to the North American side of this Venn diagram here. In North America, what we expect due process. You get a notice, you can appeal it. There are privacy rules about how your data gets used. And honestly, success often comes way down the line whether the fine actually gets collected, not whether someone got caught in the moment. So that's kind of the big difference that we found. But the thing that's in the middle of the diagram, or that right here, is where it gets interesting. So both sides do agree on a few basics: making the rules clear, communicating them well, and using technology like mobile payments and plate recognition to make compliance easy. We want to focus on changing behavior. So not just writing tickets. So these are the things that were really overlapped and we found matched on both the global side and the North American side. And this overlap is kind of what we're going to talk about more today. So every global example we're going to talk through, kind of ask yourself that question is, does it fit in this middle zone and could it apply to us? So I'm going to hand it off to Carmen next to kind of tour the world.
Thanks, Nick, and hello, everyone. Before I jump into my slides, I thought I would acknowledge the participants today. We've got an unusually large group. I just saw it go to 99. Now it's gone back to 98, maybe because I started talking. But at any rate, we're really excited to have all of you here. And I had two takeaways from all of the comments. Hi, Cynthia. I had two takeaways from all of the comments coming up. One, weather, two, hockey. So we know it's sunny in New York. That's fantastic. I'm in Phoenix right now. It's always sunny. So that's not really a milestone for me. Sounds like it's cloudy in Richmond. It's probably sunny in Vegas and Texas and everywhere else that we're coming from. And why hockey? Well, I saw some people from Buffalo, so I want to apologize for last night's game. I'm Canadian, so you can imagine who I was cheering for. And we have someone from Raleigh, where the next round is going to be coming from. So unfortunately, I still want Montreal to win, but we're going to put all of our hockey rivalries aside, and we will focus on the content that we have here today. So I'm going to take you through 6 different country and or city examples throughout the globe. Not going to be talking about North America in terms of these examples, but like Nick said, there are crossovers and takeaways that we can all have. And to sort of review what he said is, I don't want everyone to look at this like, could I take the entire ecosystem from what's happening over in this country and put it into mine? Probably not, for the reasons that he suggested: cultural, policy, legal guardrails that we have. But could I take a piece of it? What would that piece look like? How could I engage that and take some learnings from this? And as we're going through this, think about that, because at the end, hopefully we have a few minutes and maybe we can hear from each of you on that. All right, so we're going to jump into the first one, and we are going to go across the water over into Amsterdam. So we're in the Netherlands, and generally when we're talking about Amsterdam, we're talking about bikes, because that is one of the micromobility or alternative transportation method cities across the world. But today we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about parking, and we're going to talk about how they deal with the compliance, non-compliance issue. Because like Nick said, a lot of the themes that we're getting around the world are leaning towards compliance. We have started in North America hearing people say, why don't we call ourselves parking compliance officers instead of parking enforcement officers? And we're certainly seeing that globally. So Amsterdam has taken the approach of creating parking being a tax. It's actually not a payment. It's not managed through a parking operation as a payment. It's managed municipally as a required tax. So it's an entirely different perspective or framing as a result of that. Now, there's obviously ways for people to pay this tax. They are an app-based city. If you go to Amsterdam, you likely might not even see parking meters. You will see a single sign with a P on the top. It won't even identify all of the apps you can pay with. They are just simply trained to be in a digital world. There are some pay stations, but compliance is through app, and it is a tax that they are paying. Now, how do they enforce? They do have LPR. They have like 990,000 spaces, I think. They are managing these through mobile LPR, and they are attached to a national parking register. So like DMV, but for the entire country, not just county by county or state by state. So it gives them a little bit more autonomy to enforce. So what happens if somebody has not paid the tax? Well, they basically get, if you go into the next slide, they get like a bill in the mail to pay their taxes, just like we would get a bill in the mail to pay our taxes. Now, if you are non-resident, then you would get this tax bill on your windshield. But most people, if they are a resident, they're getting this via mail, and they're generally getting it a little after the tax violation happened. So the assessment for this tax is very high, though. And this is where the sort of punitive side of not being compliant comes in. The tax is actually just the cost for parking. So they will track them at the beginning and the end of a session. They'll create what they believe to have been, 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours of unpaid tax. But on top of that, there's generally like an 80 euro assessment fee. So it's really high, and it's obviously pushing people towards compliance. They do have an appeals process. So they obviously have the LPR and AI and some technical or automated checks and balances. They do have that manual visual from the driver of the vehicle and back in the offices, making sure that they're actually issuing these tax infractions efficiently. However, they do have an appeals process for if one has been issued erroneously. The appeal success rate is 66%. So this is maybe where there's a bit of struggle. Are they over submitting these tax infractions? Are they too lenient in the appeal process? Not really sure. Other challenges might be that because this is such a digitally beholden city, the equity needs to be accounted for in giving people that are low tech, potentially don't have access to that technology, opportunities to be compliant with the tax. Side note, and I won't be able to give too many side notes because I'm already running late on time. After 5 unpaid tax bills, you will get a clamp. They call them clamps, like a boot, how we know. And then it becomes a little bit more enforcement heavy versus citation heavy. So next slide, in terms of readiness, again, to Nick's point, the technology is already there. We already have vehicles scanning plates. We have the ability to cite by mail in some states across the US and in Canada. It's really that tax framing that is so different, that changes the mindset from being sort of a little bit optional, should I take a gamble and pay for parking today, versus it being a municipal tax that is required. Here, it's really important for them to have the manual double check and also have a really robust dispute handling program in place. All right, we're going to move. I don't know if it's east or west. I think maybe south. Don't correct my geography. And we're going to go into Italy and we're going to look at Rome. So Rome's quite interesting because they have specific zones. This is not the entire city, but we're going to talk about a few specific zones that they have. They call them limited traffic zone. I'm not going to try to say it in Italian. It's obviously slightly different when you look at the letters, but enforcement for these zones is not happening at each parking space. It is happening at the borders of these zones, again, through fixed cameras. And it's recording vehicles coming in and coming out, and then querying whether those vehicles have permission to be there. And not everybody has permission to be there. And it's not the type of situation like a congestion zone where you might be able to register in advance and just pay more for being in it or less. This is not a pay to play type of scenario. They truly want to fully restrict access for groups of people that are not allowed to come in. There is, of course, a fallback. If you go to the next slide, Nick, there is a fallback citation. So they are citations that then get sent, will go out to the registered vehicle owners if people are within this restricted zone without being allowed to. So what's really key in this program is being able to segment out all of your different user groups that are allowed to be there. So this could be residents, of course. This could be emergency personnel that need to be coming through. This could be delivery workers that have to keep, obviously, commerce flowing. This could be tourists that are registered for hotels. So when you go into parts of Rome and you have a vehicle, you need to register that with the hotel, and the hotel actually creates this allowability through a permit. So the other one sort of extra note is that each time you were to trip this virtual gate, you will get an additional citation. So it's not like I came in at 5 times today and I got 1 citation in the mail. You would get 5 citations in the mail. So they're pretty strict about it over there in Rome. Next slide, in terms of the fit for us over here in North America, again, it's quite similar. So we do have the technology in place. We simply don't have sort of this type of restriction that we have created at our curb. It's not really to say that we couldn't, though. I do think that this could have some fit over in North America. Moving on to the third, we are going to, now I'm pretty sure this is going south. We're going to go into the United Arab Emirates for the next couple. And this one is largely about the time of year, the time of week, and it is triggered mostly around cultural norms for this part of the world. They have a very, very strong religious foundation. And within that religious foundation, they have very, very strong traditions and expectations for behavior. And as a government, they're cognizant of this, respectful of this, and they've actually built all of their enforcement programs around this. So that doesn't really translate into North America. With the separation of church and state, we wouldn't have religious rules. We wouldn't have religious dates that we would sort of carve out with a different enforcement policy. However, I think we can translate this over when it comes to like special events, sporting districts. We could have maybe peak periods, surge pricing, for lack of a better word. For some of the cities, we were talking about New York and Buffalo being on the call today. We are pretty cognizant of the fact that you might have a lot of snow events in a year. Perhaps this is a trainable enforcement policy that you actually code into your systems, whereby an inch of snow falls, all of a sudden the enforcement practice changes so that we can be training our customers, parkers, our drivers to behave within these parameters. So I think there's some themes that we can take from that. And if we go to the next slide in terms of readiness, again, in terms of the technology, we absolutely have this technology in place. We can change enforcement rules on the enforcement technology. We can change payment rules on any of the payment technology that's out there, whether it be hardware or whether it be digital. It's just a matter of ensuring that it is very obvious that we're communicating the different types of enforcement behaviors, practices, and expectations with our parkers so that they know, again, how to be compliant. All right, the next one is quite interesting. This one is, we're going to have a couple of themes now when it comes to this SMS first type of environment. So we are now going into, I think this one is a city, and I'm just trying to figure out the city this is in. I think it's Dubai. I don't know if I put that on the slide or not, but I believe that this is in Dubai. And in Dubai, they are, again, they're really focused on compliance. They want everybody to just pay the parking fee so that they don't have to do this citation after the fact. They have four different ways or 4 or 5 different ways of enforcing. And they have, of course, many different payment options. They've got SMS, that's their largest version of payment options. They've got an app. They also allow payments through WhatsApp, which I found really interesting. They have meters, they have permits, they also have tolling tags, so you can have that auto pay when you're coming in and out of certain parking environments. However, they have 4 different ways of enforcing whether that payment has taken place, and it's all through LPR. So they've got some fixed LPR, they have mobile LPR, they've got people walking with camera scanners, and then they also crowdsource their enforcement. But what's interesting here is that, and we can maybe, we'll stay on this slide. What's interesting here is that if there is a violation in the moment, because all of the vehicles in UAE, actually, this isn't just Dubai, it's UAE. All of the vehicles in UAE are part of like a national registered vehicle program again, as well as all of the surrounding countries around them. So when an enforcement officer finds a violation, they're able to immediately tap into this national registry or the ones in the surrounding area. The vehicle owner's mobile phone is always attached to their account, and they will get a text in the moment. So this is why it's like an SMS first kind of environment. They will get a text in the moment that basically says, hey, you're parking, you're in violation, but don't worry, press this button and you can pay for your parking now, and everyone's happy, everyone's compliant, and we continue on with our day. So again, really focusing on that compliance first, but this one has a little bit more oversight. So will that work in North America? Will that not work in North America? Maybe something to think about in terms of the types of oversight that is happening in that scenario. In the next slide, we will see again the readiness, technology. We have all of this technology in place. It's simply the regulatory and culture fit. Now, when it comes to the regulatory challenge here, I think the biggest challenge is us in the US being able to, and even Canada, being able to get into a registered database that is large enough for us to actually implement something like this. Being state by state, province by province, it makes it really, really challenging for us to be able to successfully successfully implement this type of program. All right, moving right along, let's hop to another country, and we are going to go over into Australia, and we're going to spend a few minutes in Adelaide. So Adelaide has a few similarities to the UAE. And again, all the technology that's in place here really is quite available in North America. They are too really focused on that compliance first program. They're very, very low touch when it comes to hardware. They do have some payment hardware. They are cognizant of equity and making sure that payment and compliant options are available for everyone, but they predominantly are pushing their drivers and parkers to be paying for parking through the app. Now, what they have are sensors in the ground. You can see that they've got a number of thousand sensors in Adelaide. They have an app and they have an enforcement program, generally through mobile LPR. And so we would say, okay, well, we have all of those three components in numerous cities around North America. So what's the difference? The difference here is that the compliance officers, let's call them that, are actually getting directive information to their systems to point them to vehicles that are in the middle of an infraction. So when we think about sensors in North America, we might be using them for availability. We might be using them to direct people to say, hey, there's an open spot here, so you're likely to find parking, or there's no open spots over in this area, you're not going to find parking. We would do it for data collection to sort of understand the mechanics of our operation. It might help us make decisions down the road. But for the most part, I've seen it in a few environments, mostly in garages, but for the most part, especially on street, we are not demand sending out our enforcement officers to find non-compliance in the moment. But this is what's happening. When non-compliance is found, again, the app in Adelaide, which is high percentage of users, will send a notice to the parker saying, hey, you're not in compliance. Please pay your parking time now. And again, it's going to give the option to do so. What's interesting in the Park Adelaide app is that the driver can turn on an option to remotely top up if their vehicle is sensed to be in that spot. So I drive into a spot, I choose to pay for 1 hour of parking. I get tied up with my girlfriends over dinner. The sensor detects that I'm still there. It goes into the app and it says, Carmen has toggled the option to have a remote top up, and it will automatically create that top up for me so that I stay compliant. So they're really using the technology to make it easy to comply, and they're trying to avoid citations as much as they possibly can. How that translates to us, I think, pretty well. So Nick, on the next slide, we're going to see our readiness. And again, technology is a big thumbs up. The challenge here, again, is more the cultural fit. Are we comfortable with people kind of tracking our behavior and forcing us into paying for something that, some of us might, again, wish to gamble on? And we also have to consider equity issues, making sure that we have provided a number of ways for people to pay to be compliant. We are going to move over now into China. And this is probably the one that I think is the most fun because it's the most different from what we've seen in North America. But the technology exists, the technology is in play, and I don't see too many reasons why we couldn't maybe adopt something like this with ourselves as well. So in China, what they are using are basically like valet robots. You can see a picture of one here, that if a vehicle is parked either in a way that is non-compliant, or perhaps they are blocking the flow of traffic, they've double parked, they've potentially parked in a handicap zone, then these are able to come under the vehicle. They lift the car up and they are able to move that vehicle to where it is better suited to be. So it's like a lift and shift versus a tow. Now, it's it's kind of a weird feeling for us, I would say. That's my possession. How can you take my possession? But in the world that we live in, where we have the ability to tow, it's not that much different. And I think it's a more gentle experience, in fact, to have had my car moved, probably nearby, to then be able to get it versus a full tow and moving sometimes miles away and having that really disruptive experience. Are we ready for this? Not really. This would be a big cultural shift. This would be a regulatory shift, allowing moving public property. It's slightly different than booting or towing, which not every example, to Nick's point at the beginning, not every example we're even able to do unilaterally. The technology I haven't seen in North America, now maybe some people here have, I haven't seen it myself, but it clearly exists. None of these examples that we're showing you today are super futuristic in terms of maybe it will come in 5 or 10 years. These are happening today. And the last one we're going to talk about, we're now going into South America, into Colombia, and to Bogota. And this one is perhaps the most interesting, not from the technology side. I think China won out for me in that regard, but this one is the most interesting when it comes to like behavioral science experiment. So they have looked again at parking as a compliance opportunity as opposed to a more punitive one, which is a theme that we've heard today. It started about 20 plus years ago. One of the mayors at the time decided to do an experiment with his residents and constituents around what if I make it fun and educational and I start nudging people and I kind of use a little bit of peer pressure to push people into the behaviors that we want. He hired 420, I believe, 420 mimes, so actors, trained actors, and strategically put them around the city to act out making fun of people when they parked incorrectly. So if somebody double parked, if somebody parked in a space that they were not allowed to park in, these mimes would come and act out a scenario, probably make people laugh a little bit, and also kind of go, oh, I wouldn't want that to be happening with my vehicle and where I have parked. So he created more of an environment to say, like, this is public space. This public space is for all of us, and this public space matters. And access and movement and compliance of using this public space shared together is more important than enforcement of it. On the next slide, we're going to see, where it works, where it doesn't. This mayor, of course, term ended. There was a period of time where this behavioral experiment shifted into the background and compliance issues, of course, started to rear their heads. And they do, of course, have ways to enforce this. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, a new mayor has come in and is kind of picking that back up again to say, hey, let's make sure that we're respecting this community space. Let's shift this more towards education and nudging and correcting behavior instead of being so punitive around it. So in terms of whether this is ready for us in North America or not, we can look to the last slide that I have before I pass it back to Nick. The technologies here, again, most of this is all through LPR technology. We've got enforcement officers that are out there, of course. They are able to boot and tow if they have to get more punitive. But again, it's more cultural. And I think that we could get to some sort of level of this as humans. Now, we could debate, the whole North American sort of, we have some different perspectives about what our rights might be and how we might behave within them. But I think generally speaking, as humans, we want to do the right thing. We generally want to comply. We also tend to respond really well to peer pressure. and to nudge tactics. If we see other people doing something, we will follow suit. If we feel maybe a little embarrassed or a little shamed about doing something, we generally will retreat and change that behavior. So I think there could be subtle ways that we bring this into our parking operations. But as we've seen from the examples, before I pass it back to Nick, the technology lines up in almost every single case. The cultural differences can be quite vast. That can be a challenge for us to overcome, especially in such a diverse and rich culture that we all get the benefit of living within. And then a lot of it comes down to that policy and that law and how it's being governed. But I hope this sparked some interest in you all, and maybe you thought of some ways that you might be able to utilize this within your own operations. And I am going to pass this over to Nick.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carmen. So finishing global tour, we want to kind of turn to something happening right here in North America. And it is technology enabled. And what we want to talk about is kind of a fundamental shift in how enforcement labor it can be organized, and some opportunities there that we're seeing. The traditional model, I mean, we're all familiar with it. It's trained officers on foot or in vehicles, employed by an agency or a contractor, kind of out there doing the enforcement. What's emerging though is it's a distribution of that labor across different models, three new models. One being the contract or gig-based field staff, connected via mobile platforms. The next example is existing city fleet vehicles equipped with vision cameras that can facilitate enforcement. And then last one being resident submitting or public submitting of evidence via mobile apps. So those are the three different models where each of these models kind of scales coverage without scaling payroll. So that's something to consider is, you're in a traditional sense, if you wanted to scale, you really had to raise your payroll in that sense. So there's a really important warning to this slide that we do want to highlight is all of this comes with a much higher level of governance burden when you grow that distribution. So the more you distribute your enforcement labor, the more critical evidence standards become, the auditability, the traceability, and the anti-fraud controls you need to have. And also you risk some of that public trust. So scaling coverage, yes, it's easy. Scaling governance is not always as easy. So we're going to talk through each one of these three different options here. So first being that new labor model is the gig enforcement. So think of it like a rideshare app, but for parking enforcement. A property owner, they log into the platform, they say they need, someone to patrol their lot, and a trained contractor shows up with a phone, they take photos, they run through a checklist, they handle the violations, and they get paid based on the results and collections that happen through the system. So the upside, I mean, pretty obvious. You get coverage without hiring a full-time staff. You can run it around the clock if you want. And these workers can do just more than enforcement. They can check your signage. They can report any maintenance issues or cleanliness issues, things like that. But this is where it gets tricky. When you spread that work across a bunch of different independent contractors, the quality and consistency become a real concern. How many Ubers have you ever been in and it's not the cleanest Uber you've ever been? These are little examples when you do this gig-based or contract-based enforcement, you run that risk of not having a 5-star Uber ride every single time. So before any agency or operator kind of goes down this road, there's a big policy checklist that you would need to get in place first. You have to know who has the authority to enforce, what training's required, what counts as valid evidence, and then how does that appeals process work? So bottom line, the concept I think is really great. We think it's a great opportunity and has a lot of real potential, but don't skip your governance homework you need to do it at the jump start for this. Next one is the vehicle vision based one. So the big win here is that you're using vehicles your city or municipality already owns. Think dump trucks, street sweepers, any sort of maintenance vehicle you have out there. You're putting cameras on it, and now every time that they drive their normal route, they're scanning for violations. So that means you can cover bike lanes now, you can cover bus zones, you can cover no stopping areas. This is the kind of stuff that is really hard to catch with someone just walking a beat, or having a parking enforcement officer walking. you're expanding that coverage without hiring more people. But the flip side to this, because there's always a flip side or a negative, is keeping these cameras maintained, keeping these systems integrated across a fleet that may not be in your division. I mean, from a municipality standpoint, that's real work. That's additional staff. It doesn't just run itself. And the people reviewing all these images, you're looking at hundreds of photos, flagging them throughout a day. And there is a little bit of bias there from rubber stamping. It's called automation bias. So that can happen. That's a real risk. On top of that, cameras don't always get a clean shot of something. So there's bad lighting, there's weird angles, there's something blocking the plate. On the policy side, the things you really have to have locked down, first being, does your jurisdiction even allow, camera evidence from a moving vehicle? Second, a real person has to be in the review process there. They have to review the images before a citation goes out. No exceptions to that one. And then third, you need really clear rules on how long you keep the data, how transparent you are with this. These aren't just nice to have. They're really what you need to kind of keep this system up and running and legally defensible. So last example, again, these are technology-enabled enforcement opportunities out there. This is the citizen evidence one. So this is probably one of the more controversial models that we're going to talk about, where you're essentially letting everyday people submit evidence of parking violations, and in some cases, getting paid for it. So the appeal, it's really obvious. You don't need cameras or sensors or all that extra stuff out there. Regular people with phones kind of become your eyes and ears on the street. That's a huge deterrent. If anyone around you could report you, you're a lot less likely to park illegally potentially. That gets back to, Carmen's example earlier in Bogota. Um, Again, huge deterrent. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. The moment you put money on the table, people's behaviors change. Some folks might start over-reporting. Some might start targeting specific people or specific neighborhoods, and it opens a door to harassment. Someone with a grudge could abuse the system as well. So fairness really becomes a real issue pretty fast with this. So you really have to have rules in place. You have to have valid evidence and how that valid evidence is handled. You also need to have anti-fraud protections in place. Um, Also, there's an appeals process that you really need to have locked down. So the takeaway is on this one is, start small. It's okay to do a small example, prove out the rules work, pilot it a little bit, but don't scale this one until you have your governance really rock solid with it. So we've kind of looked the whole tour right now. We've looked at these global examples from Carmen. Um, we've looked at kind of what's emerging in North America. And what we want to distill in this slide is, the four most important lessons we feel like we'd like you to take away. First, I mean, you've heard it, the technology is ready. I think it's the governance that we're finding isn't always ready right there. Limiting factor, like I said, is rarely the camera or the sensor that's out there. It's that enabling authority. It's the data rules that need to be in place. It's the public trust. Second is culture determines transferability. The same tool produces vastly different outcomes depending on the compliance norms in a certain municipality or certain region. The best systems that we saw in like Amsterdam and Adelaide, they led with compliance and convenience, not citation volume. Like that's not what they were going for. Um, Fourth is that human oversight is kind of a non-negotiable, especially in the North American models. Whether it's a scanning car review in Amsterdam or like that citation violation we discussed, the human has to be in the loop. And that's kind of a governance standard we're really working with. So these four lessons, I think they hopefully will help shape, any sort of technology and policy decisions that someone might make moving forward. Home stretch right now. So this slide, we kind of lay out these four principles, but a path forward. And we're deliberately tried to make them like practical, not like aspirational. We want you to take away practical things here. First is, start with compliance. You really got to frame these enforcement investments around behavior change and curb access, not citation targets. That's not the goal we're trying to change here. That framing changes, what you measure, what you build, and how the public might perceive what you're doing. Second is designing for governance. You're going to hear us say this governance and like the policy in the back end a lot. You got to make sure you have privacy safeguards in place. You got to have human review in the loop there. And third, pilot before scaling. It's okay to start small. It's just okay to just start with one corridor. Every successful large scale deployment that we looked at really started small. It wasn't let's roll this out to the large masses. Um, Lastly, you really got to match the tool you're going to get to your context. The best technology is the one that your policy environment can support. The best technology is the one that your staff has the capacity to manage and maintain. The best technology out there is the one that your community will support as well. Um, so there's not again, there's not a universal answer. There's not a right tool. We've said this in past presentations where we're talking about different technologies. The tool really depends on your specific context. So that kind of wraps us up. We looked at the North American landscape. We looked at our global models. We kind of looked at some emerging labor shifts that were technology enabled. The real question kind of that's up on the screen right here is, what do you think you're going to bring home? Like sometimes it might not be the flashiest technology, but the idea that may actually fit with your municipality or your operation or your authority. We're curious and we'd love to kind of hear from you kind of what's sticking with you. And we want to open it up now to any questions and thoughts. And we are monitoring the chat and we also are monitoring the questions.
And if there are no questions, who's going to be bold and give their opinion on what they think could work the best for them or what they don't
Mhm,
think could work and why? We have a few minutes left.
mhm. I see one comment. What works well for us is LPR embedded with AI. That assistance there, I think, can definitely help, be a force multiplier.
What we're seeing in the rest of the chat, if you read that, is some states and areas are making LPR use more challenging. So again, that comes into like the technology is fantastic and we can use it for
Mhm,
good. But if the laws aren't in place to support us to do so, it makes it really, really tricky. And I think with LPR embedded with AI, it's going to get us a lot farther than
mhm,
traditional LPR has because it's going to put on some logic. But to Nick's point, and what the deck is trying to outline here is that sort of last check, that last manual human check and oversight is really what's going to
mhm.
bring it cohesively and more sort of fairly and equitably to our parkers and drivers.
So we do have another question. So
Mhm.
the national database in other countries is a big differentiator versus the USA, Canada. I'm not sure if that's a question or is there
N-
another?
It
It's a
is,
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that on the policy side that, yeah, there's would be great if we could do all these things, especially like the UAE models that Carmen was talking about. Um, but we don't have that. We don't have that repository. We don't have that huge database being able to send an SMS immediately.
yeah, I think until and if we're able to solve that problem, it makes it challenging.
Mhm.
Somebody's asked about new booting technology. I didn't come across anything earth-shattering in terms of new booting technologies. I guess it was more just the alternative to booting, which was the scenario that we had coming out of China, where they're just lifting and shifting versus, booting or towing. But I didn't see any new new booting technology in our
Yeah,
travels.
we did not see any in our travels as well. I appreciate the thoughts here, and it's interesting to hear that like folks are using AI tools to kind of help level up or like, be a force multiplier when it comes to double checking plates, ensuring that they're read correctly.
There's an interesting comment in here with regards to compliance over citations.
Hmm.
And this is, I think, the tension that we're going to feel in our parking operations, because
Yeah.
if we are really focused on revenue, there is more money per driver in a citation than there is in compliance. So how do we manage through that from a budget perspective to be able to meet our revenue targets
Hmm.
while shifting over to that compliance first? I don't have the answer to it. That's,
Yeah.
really an operation by operation choice in terms of what they're valuing. And I
Hmm.
suspect it's quite different across industries as well.
That's true. Yeah. And that's one of the things we touched on a lot, the public versus private parking. Those are two different animals and different ones that kind of need different types of technologies and operations. Um,
Yeah. And to Paul's point here, where he's saying if compliance drives up, meter revenues drive up. Yes, of course. The the revenue per ticket might be different, but perhaps that's maybe where you start playing around with, well, I'm going to open up my hours of enforcement. So I'm going to actually expand my
mhm,
enforcement hours, which can drive up that parking revenue and come up with other ways to compensate. I mean, in some cases, it might simply be increases. Maybe it's
mhm,
dynamic parking where you're looking back at the previous quarter and looking at your occupancy levels and either shifting prices up or prices down. There's different toggles I think that we can all deploy to find that right balance.
mhm.
There
The
were a
question.
couple, yeah,
Oh, sorry, go on.
going to say exactly what you were going to say, probably. There are a couple of other questions in the chat. One is, what do you think about frog parking gates? And then there was another right after that. Do you want to address that before we're ending our session? Or
I
can you?
think with regards to frog parking gates, we should probably hold that question. We have some pretty strict rules around not talking about specific
Mm,
vendors and promoting or not promoting specific vendors. So maybe whoever asked that question could ask somebody off the
yeah,
record, but not in
yeah.
this sort of public format. That would be our request.
That's fair.
I will address that one. With public compliance method, with the public compliance method where anyone can report what database is the public using to determine if a vehicle is compliant. So this is more so if someone sees a vehicle parked illegally or parked in a bike lane or parked in a bus lane or bus stop, they can take a picture of that. They could get pictures of certain evidence requirements, and then that's submitted. And then someone else, a human in the loop, actually has to review um, that photographic evidence. I know we're at our last minute, so now, Carmen, is there any other parting thoughts you might have?
I I don't think so. I think this was well, I know it was a fun exercise for us on
Hmm.
the tech committee, and as Nick mentioned at the top of the call, it's a collective. We have many hands that bring this information together. Some of you are on the call here. But it's fun to see what people around the world are doing, what lessons we can learn, and which ones, just simply might not work for us. Hopefully, this can give us more to ruminate on as we, yeah, come to the conference and
Hmm.
talk about all things parking, mobility, and transportation. And of course, enforcement and compliance is always one of the biggest topics. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much, everyone.
Well, Carmen and Nick, thank you so much for this incredibly informative presentation. I know that it's been very helpful, and certainly to all of you for participating, engaging, and simply joining us today. So that is the conclusion of our meeting today. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.